There are not many days left for the Washington State Legislature to pass HB 1923. That's the Mosquito Fleet Act, and that's sponsored by Greg Nance, who is the state representative. HB 1923 recently passed a vote in the House Transportation Committee. This is the second year that this bill has been introduced by Representative Nance. Last year, when I asked Governor Bob Ferguson if he supported the bill, he basically said, no, not yet, but he hinted that he would possibly support it in the future. Well, the future is now. The bill is very much alive again in this session. And here to talk with me today about the Mosquito Fleet Act is Peter Phillips. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
You are president and CEO of Colibri Northwest. Colibri Northwest publishes magazines for municipalities and associations and for ferry operators, but that's not all you do. Colibri Northwest also produces conferences that bring together civic leaders, policymakers, and regulators in the commercial fishing, commercial maritime, and marine transit sectors. That's a lot. You're busy. You have a lot of irons in the fire. Finally, Colibri Northwest helps cities and ports with advocacy, advocating for public policy around fishing and maritime and land use and economic activation of marinas and ports, as well as, on top of all that, marine transit policy development. Do I have all that right?
That's pretty good, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we actually covered a conference called Fix Our Ferries. I think it was the Fix Our Ferries Summit in Mukilteo about a year and a half ago, or a year and a quarter ago. And I really learned at that time what a passion you have for the idea of passenger ferries. You have a long history, really, in advocating for this. What's the short version of the way you describe HB 1923 to people?
Well, it's a pretty simple bill, and the intent, as I read it, is to broaden the ability of public entities to work together independent of the state to stand up and run marine transit, specifically passenger-only ferries. And importantly, to be able to do that cross-jurisdictionally and with private operators and public-private partnerships. So two counties can work together, a city and a county can work together, a transit agency and a city and a county can work together, et cetera, et cetera.
Is this something they couldn't do now? Or does this just make it easier, or does this make it possible?
I believe that none of that is currently prohibited, but by codifying it in a bill like this, it becomes very clear that it is allowed, and it encourages those kind of relationships, again, independent of the state.
What excites you about this? If it passes, if it becomes law, what are the possibilities?
Well, it gives smaller jurisdictions, counties, rural areas, places outside of the central waterfront, which is the Seattle, Tacoma, Washington State ferry served community. It gives those smaller communities the opportunity to work together with private companies, with other counties, with cities, so that they can stand up a passenger-only ferry service that serves their needs specifically, and affordably and efficiently.
So is this, by definition, would these be routes that would be in communities that are not currently WSF ferry served?
Well, they could be in routes that are not served by Washington State Ferries, absolutely. They can also, importantly, be in Washington State ferry served communities that are perhaps not served adequately. And it's a way to complement what Washington State Ferries is doing now. As we know, Washington State Ferries is under tremendous pressure to provide service to communities that they really can't do. And this allows a really specified marine transit options to fill in the gaps that Washington State ferries can't do.
That's really in the preamble of the bill. If you read the first paragraph of the bill, it alludes to the challenges of WSF. So it kind of positions this as an assist, a support. And to be clear, it's an entirely different kind of service, even if it's the same route, right? It's faster. We haven't gotten into that yet, but the boats are smaller and faster, passenger only. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, how the boats are different from the big, lumbering, giant WSF car ferries?
Well, importantly, as you say, they're not car ferries. Car ferries are much more expensive to build and to operate, which is why a state is particularly well suited to do that kind of service. Passenger-only ferries are much smaller, much less expensive, and much easier to put into service. Most of these boats don't need any special terminal accommodations. They can call in any current recreational marina. So they're flexible, they're adaptable, they're inexpensive, and they're much quicker to stand up. We could stand up these ferry services in 18 months. Less if it's appropriate.
One of the things that kind of excites me about the bill is the way it could connect communities that are not WSF served and probably never will be. And I think about, say, a route from Friday Harbor or from the San Juans, Friday Harbor, East Sound, Lopez Village, and then up to Bellingham. I think hundreds of people would use that to make medical appointments. And by the way, when you talk about passenger ferry, then you have to also think there's another extension to there, which is what is the ground transportation available when the person gets to the dock. Let's say you're dropped off at the dock in Bellingham. Is there a shuttle that takes you to Peace Medical Center, things like that? But still, the alternative is to take the car ferry to Anacortes and then all the way around through Mount Vernon, all the way up to Bellingham. And the idea of a much faster direct route, it's just really exciting. And, I think of other routes like, it's just kind of like a dream list, and a lot of these might also have some tourism applications too, but say Everett to Oak Harbor, Everett to Port Townsend, Des Moines to Vashon Island, right? Des Moines to Olympia. Because another change that's happened in this bill. So what about some of those smaller, more novel routes? Is that a possibility? Is that a
Oh, absolutely. And you were talking about routes from Everett to Clinton, Everett to Langley. That's not very far away. And we are, I'm in discussions with Everett as we speak in pursuing a demand study to look at what such a route might look like. Also, interestingly, there are a lot of boats that are passenger-only boats that are currently being used in California that will become obsolete in California because California has a zero-emission regulation, which means there can be no diesel-electric boats or gasoline boats. So those boats, a lot of them are almost brand new, and they're going to have to find a new home, and Puget Sound is ideal for that. So you can bring existing boats and serve, Everett to Whidbey Island. You can serve the San Juans. You can serve perhaps Olympia to the airport. You can expand King County's marine transit to add Vashon to the airport. Right now I've heard that if you live on Vashon Island and you want to take an airplane at SeaTac, that often you have to spend the night on the mainland to be able to make that flight. So you're looking at, $200 for a hotel. Just think if you could get on the boat at Vashon, get off at the Des Moines Marina, and take a little shuttle that's 1.5 miles up to the airport. That would be very convenient, and I think we'd find a lot of users.
Yeah, when you look at the map of the Salish Sea and Puget Sound, there are so many places, there's so many instances where you can just look across the water and say, I could be there, I could be right there. But if you have to go on car ferries and on highways, think about, for instance, going from Port Townsend to the San Juans or Port Townsend to Oak Harbor, it's a half day. It's every bit of a half day to do that. In many cases, it's 2 ferry rides. And yet, if there was a fast ferry, a passenger-only fast ferry, you could make that, in an hour? So it's got a lot of possible implications of connecting communities that otherwise are not very connected. And it's kind of where the whole Mosquito Fleet concept comes back, I guess. How well is HB 1923 known in the community? You're pretty plugged into the community. Is this the talk of the? It was last year, I know. Is that interest renewed again this year?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think the interest ever went away. We got so close last year to passing it. I think if you are a civic leader, elected official, or administrator in a waterfront community, then you know about the efforts in Olympia to make it easier to stand up passenger-only ferry service.
Now let's talk about how these services would actually be put together. Would these be the bill? We'll real quickly say there's about half a dozen different kinds of political subdivisions that would be allowed to set something like this up, from county councils to towns to transit districts, ports. But let's say that the community has decided that it wants to do this. Are there credible vendors and consultants and contractors who could put this together? Or are there dangers that this could be fly-by-night, unstable, and unreliable?
Well, the reason that Puget Sound is so perfectly suited for this kind of initiative is because every maritime business imaginable is in Puget Sound. Puget Sound is the center of maritime commerce, the maritime economy in the United States, and that is a fact. At one point, I don't know if it's still the case, but at one point, every commercial vessel, Jones Act vessel, which means the smaller boats like tugboats, ferries, barges, etc., every vessel in operation on the west coast of the United States was built in Washington State. Every single one of them. So we have the expertise, soup to nuts, from people like me, maritime publishers, to the lawyers, all the way through to the machine shops, the shipyards, the personnel that would run these boats. We have it all right here. We would not be shipping any of this to Florida. We would all, with those dollars that we spend, would be spent right here in Washington State.
And then also about the business model. You think that the business model would be durable and well, it might be profitable. It wouldn't necessarily need to be profitable if it was done publicly, but and we should say that these would be taxing districts. That's what the bill allows, is to set these up as taxing districts. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be a combination of tax support and still fares. And so there's multiple revenue streams. But does the business model seem strong to you in looking at some of these novel routes?
Well, I think it does. Each route is unique into itself, and we're not reinventing the wheel. This type of operation exists all over the country, all over the world, and it's a very simple process. You do a demand study to determine who would use it, how much they pay, what types of vessels are needed, what the subsidy, if any, would be required to operate it, and then you proceed accordingly. If the demand study demonstrates that there is not the demand that one thought there might be, you don't implement the ferry system. So that's the necessary first step. And then, as I said, with passenger-only service, terminal improvements are not necessary in most cases. You can operate from a recreational marina. In fact, interestingly, we call this the Mosquito Fleet Act. Any community that is currently extant, that has been here for 120 years, probably has a public piece of land on the waterfront because that community exists because there was a ferry calling it that community. There were no roads. So we already have the shoreside infrastructure to support this. Passenger-only ferries are not particularly expensive in the scheme of things. You're looking at boats that probably start at $1 million and a big 350 passenger boat like what Kitsap Transit and King County operate. You're looking at $15 million and a whole spectrum in between. So you pick the boats that are well suited for your route. Terminal improvements are not a very heavy lift. And then we have the operations personnel who operate the boats, usually under contract to that public agency. So it's a pretty simple model, and it's pretty straightforward to see what it would cost to do and whether the community wants to support that cost on a long-term basis.
Is there any danger that success, that if this was a great success and there were multiple new routes and new operators, any danger that this would somehow hurt WSF if it was successful?
Well, I don't think so. In fact, I'm pretty sure no, because Washington State Ferries operates car ferries. That's what they do. They do that well. And what we need to do is make sure that we allow Washington State Ferries, not allow them to do it, but that we support them. Right now, they're being asked to do everything for everybody, and they can't do that. So what we would want to do is to fill in the gaps. Let Washington State Ferries run the big car ferries where those car ferries are needed, and they are absolutely needed. We need to get construction material, food, medical services. But where they're not needed, commuter routes, going to see a ball game, having dinner somewhere, that's where passenger-only ferry service should fill in the gaps.
And there's a massive environmental angle to this too, right? I mean, all of these passenger ferries. When you go back to that, what we were talking about, the distance that you have to go via car and big ferry to get, say, from Port Townsend to the San Juans or Anacortes, these direct routes are walk-on.
I'm excited about it. I'm delighted that there's the interest that there is. I mean, it's an initiative whose time has come. We have the technology now. We have the population centers, and there's absolutely a need. I mean, if you live on Vashon Island or on the San Juans, there's no other way to get to an airport or medical services than with a ferry. And if you do it affordably and smartly, I think passenger-only ferry service is here.
Before we go, I want to build on the medical services, the healthcare angle. It's a real priority in the San Juans to think of these as resources for healthcare. It can be very difficult and very challenging to be able to get to medical appointments via the big ferry schedules and the big ferry logistics. So that's medical and healthcare is a big part of this. All right, well, that's Peter Phillips. Peter, thank you very much for your expertise and thank you for your leadership in this.